Hello and welcome to our Women in Football webinar with Dr Damien Taylor. Thank you for joining us bright and early. My name's Sarah and I lead on the events programme here at Women in Football. Today we're excited to be exploring the practices of senior leaders to attract, develop and retain high-performance female coaches in sport. Damien's research is particularly interesting as it can be transferred to all leaders in business, including football. There is a chat facility here that available, so please say hello and let us know where you're calling in from. And also, if you've got any burning questions or any questions at all, please drop them in the chat and we'll try to get to them at the end of the session if we've got time. I'll now hand over to Damien and he can introduce himself and lead us through his research and findings. Welcome, Damien.
Thank you very much, Sarah, and thank you very much for everyone attending. Appreciate your valuable time and giving it to me. It's something I'm really passionate about, and just a little bit about my background for you. I'm a specialist leadership consultant and researcher. I work with senior leaders worldwide in many different industries, including high-performance sports, corporates, military, special forces, emergency service and mental health services. And I'm currently researching the concept of leadership excellence. And my research is from a new perspective, and we'll dive further into that, but it really gets into the beliefs and values of proven leaders and to explore how their decisions are made, which is really pertinent to our discussion today. And I've conducted over 150 interviews with senior leaders worldwide in these varied segments. But one thing I also specialise in is research of women senior leaders and the lack of women senior leaders in many of these segments. And my work and research in this space, as I said, from a new perspective, but it began back in a master's degree where I took an interest and I was mentoring some women who wanted to be high performance coaches and couldn't get a job. And I wanted to look further into it, and that led to my doctoral research that examined the lack of women high-performance coaches in sport. But my background, of over 3 decades of experience in global corporate general management, and I've also been involved in high-performance sport globally as an athlete, as a coach, a consultant, mentor for over 4 decades. I've been lucky enough to win a world championship, a national Oceania championship. As an athlete, I'm awarded coach, but what really fascinated me from looking at the lack of women high-performance coaches is looking at the organisational practices and the senior leaders. What are they doing to attract, develop and retain women high-performance coaches? So we're going to dive into the research. We're going to have a look at what I did, some key findings. So what we'll look at, I'll discuss the research problem as I saw it, and the purpose of the research. We'll look at the main elements of the research and dive into the results. And then we'll move into the key findings from my research and what is exciting to share with you, the outcomes of that from the attraction, development, and retention perspectives. But I can look at what does it all mean and how it can be applied by the leaders of NSOs and NGOs, because this is where we're going to move the needle. And finally, we'll take a look at my current research and how this dives a lot deeper into the practices of senior leaders and the influence that they have, particularly on segments such as women high-performance coaches. But the number of women high-performance coaches in sport have really concerned me. And look, the great thing about women's professional sport, it's thriving, which is terrific. And we've seen the rise in prominence around the world, which provides wonderful opportunities for women to compete at the highest professional level. But while I've watched and enjoyed the growth of these codes, my passion for leadership and coaching had me constantly questioning where are the women high-performance coaches. And the concerning stats for me, if we look at them, we still have between 6 and 15% globally representation of women high-performance coaches. And in fact, the IOC's report from the Tokyo Olympics on the coaching representation celebrated breaking the 10% barrier of women high-performance coaches with 13% representation. And that really concerned me. And I wanted to examine why is this the case that we're celebrating just breaking 10%. And when I looked at the literature, it's been extensive over 4 or 5 decades. And if you look right back into the implementation of things like Title IX, which was back in 1972, when women coaches in university sports over in America, for instance, was at 93% representation, but an alarming stat, or something that might be surprising to a lot of people attending, that since the Title IX implementation, the number of women coaches at university level is now at 43%. So the majority of the research that has been focused has looked at the barriers for women to high performance coaches and from the women's perspective. And if we go back to that women's representation going down to 43%, we see a lot of the male coaches now using women's professional sport as a vehicle for them to push through into the men's professional sport as well. And then looking at the barriers in general has come from social and cultural factors perspective. The highlights were really still male dominant with decision makers, the leaders, particularly at board, CEO and director levels and in major sporting organisations. And what does that do? That maintains ecosystems of male hegemonic perspectives, homogenous designs, which is similar designs, same people doing the same thing, making the same decisions. Fixed historical cultures, so that a real reluctance to, this is our history, this is our culture, and we don't want to upset and we don't want to move, which affects our social outlooks and our practices. And the literature shows that social, cultural, economic and psychological factors have all played a really influential role in the barriers. And the other thing that really came out is ecological system models have been widely used, and we use them in psychology a lot to profile people, and they play an influential role in the barriers. And then there was really important research done by Nicole Boyd and Jude Tove in 2012, and they were using the ecological systems models, and I'll show you one shortly, to analyse the lack of women high-performance coaches. However, Lavoie thought that this model could be adapted specifically to look at the lack of women high-performance coaches, and she made a model called the ecological intersectional model. Now, if we look at the EIM from Lavoie, there's 4 levels in ecosystems, and you look at individual levels, and these are the barriers in the grey here, but they're generally, family and siblings, and then we turn to interpersonal, which is our influences perhaps of leaders around coaching and school, etc. And all at the organisational level, we're starting to see more and more barriers, and same at the socio-cultural context. And my real fascination came with what we know all the barriers. What are the facilitators? I want to know what good practices are to attract, develop, and retain women high-performance coaches. And then just to help understand what are these 4 factors, because they're really important to understand. So social factors, they're stimulated by people with their communication, all forms, and through their interaction with them. So what's written, verbal, social media is very, very, very prominent, of course, these days. Also with our clubs, with our members, with our crowds, with our staff. And this factor is really important. It's the biggest one that you'll see, and it directly influences the practices experienced by every stakeholder. So you think of our networks, our groups, our teams, the environments and the ecosystems created by them and developed, and they shape our beliefs and our values. And as such, our cultural factors are formed from them. And these are defined by the creation of or change of culture because of people and the social factor. So we follow historical beliefs, we've got hierarchies, we've got leaders and leadership, status of people, tradition, value systems, groups, environments, power relations, which are really important, including social media and media, which are really important. Then the economic factor, that's not just defined by money received and spent. We need to look at the economic factor from the investment of people and the growth that's created from it. And then as a result of all that, the psychological factor is a result of that social, cultural and economic factors that provide a safe environment for us. They provide a feeling of support and well-being. The areas of particular importance with the coaches that came out was a focus on the support. or the lack thereof, I should say, their inner feelings surrounding guilt, particularly around motherhood and parenting when they're not there. It affects their confidence, there's stress, there's marginalisation, family and motherhood, as I said, and the pressures and expectations placed on them when they're put into these positions inexplicably by the leaders of NSOs, NGOs, and all forms of the media. If we look at the barriers, and in the literature, I separated them into the 4 factors, and I provide them in the picture. And as you can see, the social factor is clearly dominated. And I'm sure you've heard of the old boys club and glass ceiling, the lack of ongoing coach development and education, lack of challenge given to roles, lack of recruitment of women high performance coaches, male tokenism is another huge one. Given a role based on gender to appease number of quotas, and that really affected the women who have brought that up a lot. Lack of support networks and homologous representation, lack of mentoring, and we can go into that, but you can see it's a really, really big factor. The culture is next, and as I explained in the slide before, culture is affected by all of these social factors and managerial hegemonic hiring decisions. So it's got to look this way, it's got to sound this way. So male coach is replaced by male coach replacement, because this is what we see, this is what we're used to. We don't want to change these things. The economic factor, and we talked about with money, but investment really is a key one around there. And these 3 factors really affected the psychological factors. So if we dive into research further, Lavoie and Nicole Banwell identified that research was extremely limited at the organisational level, in particular, to understand what are good practices to attract, develop, and retain women high performance coaches. But what also became evident was the importance of the practices or decisions by the senior leaders. And there was a theory called institutional theory, and in particular institutional work. And I don't want to dive into too much of that theory, but what I needed to explore was the institutional work to understand that talks about the practices of senior leaders, because they shape the practices. They can disrupt, they can align, they can change and maintain whatever happens in an organisation or a team or within a group. And in particular, they shape the practices targeted at women high performance coaches, which intersects with those 4 factors that were talked about. So what was the purpose? The purpose was based on this lack of knowledge of the organisational level. My research was to identify to what extent the social, cultural, economic and psychological factors influence the practices of leaders of national sporting organisations, NGOs, to encourage women high-performance coaches. There were 2 research questions that were really important. So what organisational practices attract, develop and retain women as high-performance coaches? And what organisational practices intersect with social, cultural, economic and psychological factors? And how do they act as enablers at the ecological intersection model, that EIM, at the organisational level, targeted to women high-performance coaches? So my research was 2 phases. And the first phase is really interesting, because it was looking at publicly available strategic plans from NSOs in Australia. And I looked at the plans to be analysed for targets on women high-performance coaches and social, cultural, economic and psychological factors based on the definitions that I went through. Now, there were 46 NSOs that were identified to review, and 40 of them were identified from the 2019 Australia allocated funding that met the AIS high-performance criteria for the Olympics. Olympics, Commonwealth Games and World Championships, and 6 were independent NSOs from our highest sporting codes in our country, as per the financial review. But you look at Australian rules football, some of you would know, Cricket Australia, the FFA, Rugby League, Rugby Union, and Tennis Australia. Now, what's interesting, over 29 had strategic plans available for review, and I've got my own thoughts on strategic plans and the value of them. But of those 29 who had plans available, only 20 of them mentioned high-performance coaching in their plan. But really interesting, only 5 of them mentioned women high-performance coaches in their plan. After reviewing all of that, that led to phase 2, which was really exciting for me. And that was a multiple case study of these 5 identified NSOs who had targets for women high-performance coaching within their strategic plans. And the case studies comprise semi-structured interviews, and they could be broken into 2 study groups, known as study 1, study 2. But the groups were given the same questions so that I could look at the results and cross-check them to see what the gaps were and differences in perspective. So study 1 comprised of 16 women identified current women high-performance coaches, and they had to have coached at the Olympic Games, Commonwealth Games, or World Championship level from 2016 onwards. And I'll give you a really interesting fact of why that was. And it's an interesting fact from the 2016 Olympic Games. Australia had 160 registered high-performance coaches representing their country in that Games, and only 15 or 9% of them were women, which was really, really surprising. And then study 2 comprised 13 senior managers, and they were the CEOs, directors of high performance, and managers of high performance coaches. So after all that, there came out some key findings, and these were around the practices, and these are really fascinating. And in relation to the practices, there were 12 identified overall, but I cross-checked from the 2 study groups. And as you can see from the table attached, and I'll go through these because they are interesting. There are 5 attraction, there are 3 development, 4 retention. But also with the practices, each practice had associated recommendations. Now, if we look at start with the attraction, flexibility with family needs was really important. But what came out of that is, can we roster training? We're looking at a lot more professional sports now. So is there a need to have training at 6 a.m., at 7 a.m., at 8 a.m.? It's family time actually for everyone. So can we roster training schedules to non-school hours between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m.? Another thing really came out, can we establish on-site childcare? Instead of saying make a decision, because this has really came out a lot with the women high-performance coaches, feel forced to make a decision. I want to have a family who can't coach. So they've done all this hard work to get into high-performance coaching criteria and selection, and then they want to start a family like we all do. I certainly want to start a family, proud father, but are you forced to make a decision that you're going to have a child so you can't coach? So can we establish on-site childcare or surrounding? How can we move the needle to have that support around? Can we roster days off for coaches on weekdays throughout the year, which is really good, just to have a breather? It's such a hard job and a hard role and high profile. We need to start looking at that mental health aspect as well. Talent identification was a really big one, but to identify recently retired women athletes with an interest to continue in the sport and approach them to become a high-performance coach and encourage the skill that they have to become a high-performance coach. And I've interviewed coaches then and post that I've worked with that if they weren't tapped on the shoulder and identified, they wouldn't have coached. And some of them are 35 years in coaching. Now, rowing Australia's got a couple of wonderful coaches, 30 plus years, that had no intention of becoming a coach, but it was that talent identification, that tap on the shoulder to say, hey, I think you'd be a terrific coach. And they were great athletes. They weren't gold medalists, but their communication was great. They were great with teamwork. They had all these identified assets to become a coach, but it didn't even look like they would do it. They didn't think of it, but that encouragement, so that talent identification is really important. It came through loud and clear. Another really important one is transparent career pathways. And I ask a lot of CEOs and directors, what's your pathway? It shouldn't be gendered, but is it clear and transparent selection criteria? Do you showcase a clear statement of skills and experience required as a high-performance coach? Do you promote internal and external scholarship opportunities? Do you strongly encourage women to apply for that position? But is it clear? Do you know how you're going to be measured, what the selection is? Because often the decisions are being made on what looks good for the club, what looks good for the members, rather than looking and putting the hard work in to get the best leaders possible to select from. So that clear, transparent pathway will encourage and attract a lot more women to apply because they know what they've got to meet. One thing for the women and difference with the men that really came out, that if you had 5 selection criteria in your pathway, women judge themselves a lot harder on they might be meet or exceed 4 of the criteria and fall down in 1 and say, I'm great at these, but I'm not good at that. Men are think about it more pragmatically, saying I'm great at these 3 things, not so strong at these 2, I'll just wing it. I'll put myself in and have a crack. So that's why if we can get these transparent career pathways right, we'll attract a lot more women putting their hat in the ring to be part of a selection and a robust selection criteria, but a good selection criteria. Training camps were a big problem that came up, and we need senior managers to be involved more in the planning process of coach roles during training camps. What comes out is generally there's been a head coach, a male head coach running it, and it's my way of the highway, and there's a lot more male coaches involved. They tend to stick together, and they were giving women administration role. You can get the valuables, you can get the bus, you can organise the meals. They're there to coach, but they haven't got the support from the senior managers. And some senior managers and a lot of the coaches say we need senior managers to attend the training camp as well, to look over these things, to help lead. And the women high-performance coaches that are there, they're there to play an active role in their leadership. They're there to coach. They're not there to do chores. Enable women, it's really important at the training camps, we need the women to be training and coaching the male teams and athletes. Yeah, if they're there on a camp. They're not there to watch an occasional drill. They need to take some leadership because they're there as a leader. Not to be introduced as a women leader, there as a leader, they're part of the leadership team. And then showcasing, this is another huge thing for me and something I work with leaders on, and I ask the question to understand, do you showcase at all? I struggle to find showcasing for women high-performance coaches on any social media, and we've got to understand the effects of not showcasing women high-performance coaches. We've got to ask women high-performance coaches in their sport, how would they like to be showcased to stakeholders to promote their skill set? Then the development, high-performance coach skills. It needs to be a collaboration. We establish a structured development process that includes a minimum of 2 collaborative meetings. We're doing a lot of workshop and sending women high-performance coaches to a lot of courses, which is terrific, but we're getting them overqualified, but we're not understanding what skills they would like to enhance. They might have been to plenty of leadership and management workshops, but they need to get better education around communication, about social media, about how they communicate with male teams so they can coach male teams in there. And we need to tailor individual development programs for them, and that comes with a collaboration. We need to enable attendance of leadership and management programs. The AIS over here, there's some great ones, and I'm sure there's some fantastic ones. Women in Football runs some fantastic workshop as well, but we've got to tailor more, but we've got to collaborate, talk more together, rather than making a judgment call. We think this will be a good idea. Provision of mentors. We've got to identify suitable mentors for the mentoring is a really interesting thing. I'm very lucky to mentor someone at the moment who's now stepped up into a national role. But the mentors have got to align. You've got to communicate well. You've got to be able to have the tough discussions when they need to be had. So you need that honesty there, because the honesty builds trust. But we've really got to be looking for more mentors, but we've got to be looking at who we align those mentors with the coaches. Really important. And establish a safe working environment. What does that mean? Training camp instructors that comprise high-performance coaches with strong skill sets in which women are highly represented. And we've got to activate a code of conduct. Some of the stories that I told you before, you can organise the bus, you can always organise the value, but we've got to really get that collective team understanding and collective to provide a welcoming, inclusive, elite athlete training program and environment for all coaches. Really important. And the retention, regular communication. The communication was really poor. There's a feedback from both sets, from the senior leaders and the coaches. So we really need to, and it's something I work on a lot. Communication is so important. What does good communication do? Provides recognition and validation to both sets, because it's one of the greatest things we always look from the day we're born to the day we die. We want to be recognised and validated, and good communication does that. So we establish open, clear, regular, preferably weekly, one-on-one communication. But we've got to listen. With the senior leaders have got to show that they're listening. It's one thing to talk and hear, but are we listening? Are we absorbing? And then how do we respond to that? And that needs to be communicated by the women, and by the leaders to the women high-performance coaches to help reduce this ambiguity and frustration. Well, I've given you feedback, but what's happened with that situation? Is anything going on? Peer networks weren't very strong. It's something that really was identified that would like to see improvement, particularly identified for cross-sport professional development programs for women to attend. So not just having the same conversations with people in the one sport. What really is interesting and fascinates me with my leadership research is different segments and understanding challenges. Some are similar, some are different, but you get some great ideas of how did you manage that? And wow, I would have thought of that in our sport in particular, but it really can be brought across into this sport. So that was really pertinent. There were ideas such as Facebook groups, WhatsApp groups, online. The coffee catch-ups were just as good. And often that face-to-face interaction helps build strong relationships as well. But we really need to improve our peer network, and particularly cross-sport was really came out loud and strong. And we've got to encourage our experienced women high-performance coaches to lead peer groups. And going back to that story of one of the women who was shoulder tapped, who's 35 years plus in rowing, she's now a real role model and inspiration to lead a peer group to assist with growth and development within that sport and other sports. So we've got to identify and tap into that resource as well. Advocacy for women high-performance coaches. This is really incumbent on the leaders to be strong advocates for women high-performance coaches. And we've got to start calling out inappropriate situations that may be faced by women high-performance coaches. Now, often it can be the case that the male assistant coach is out with the women high-performance coach, and the male coach is approached by people with an assumption that they're the head coach. We've got to start calling these things out for what it is. We've got to track the equitable acknowledgement of high-performance coach achievement for women and for men. There was a really interesting discussion I had with one of the interviewees in a particular sport, and there was a photo on the wall with 14 people in the picture, celebrating a gold medal performance, and there were 12 men, 2 of the women, the 2 women were athletes, and I asked this particular leader, what do you see in that picture? And it was telling me a great story of how hard that all worked, and the celebration of winning the gold medal under circumstances I didn't think it was going to win it. But what was really interesting to me, that there were no women leaders in the picture, but the conversation was around the celebration of the great work. And I acknowledge it was great work. Any medal winning performance is fantastic. But when I said, this is what I see, where are the women leaders in the photo? Turned around and had a look and said, well, wow, I've never even thought about that. And that's a senior leader in a national sport organisation that hasn't got an awareness of there are no women leaders, and that was CEOs, that was board, that was high performance coaches, that was high performance staff. Was a really eye opener for me, and a concerning aspect of discussions I've had and ongoing in the work that I do. Another one, obviously, is motherhood and parenting support. The family is really important. It's important to all of us, but we need to start looking at educating the leaders on professional development for them on the complexity of motherhood and parenting needs for coaches. For the women high performance coaches, their parenting needs, and they carry a lot of guilt for not being there. But we all want to be there for our children. We've got to look at enabling family travel to competition and training camps, particularly when babies involved. I'm quite close with a woman high performance coach who's coach at Olympic level, and we were at a workshop together, and she had a 6-month-old with her, which I thought was fantastic. And some of the looks around the room, because a baby's making noise while someone's presenting, I found quite offensive, because we need to celebrate this wonderful leader who's so passionate about helping and being present and bringing her baby to the workshop, not, oh my goodness, this baby's making noise and interrupting my train of thought. Now, we've got to be better than that. And they're the things that we've got to educate and be around, and have that family needs, and we can have that support around them, that they can coach, they can be present, because we need these skilled people around. They're fantastic for our sport, they're fantastic for us. So we've got to stop having that, make a decision whether you want to do this or you want to do this. How do we create that support so we attract, but develop, but we retain as well? It's not making the decision to come or go. It's how do we bring that on? If we look further aside from that attraction, development, retention, the findings show the 4 factors. They each had key components. So the social factor, really important. And the culture factors, they were the most prominent, but they have an interactive role. So you can see the social factor, the senior manager, is really important. And that communication we talked about, recognition, validation, and the interaction between people and beliefs and values. The cultural, the visibility, but the power dynamics, the leaders hold the power dynamics, from that social factor, the cultural, and they can bring in that status belief of women high performance coaches. They're coaches, they're part of the team, they're vital to the team. Or do we keep that status of there's only a small number and keep that down? So that culture was really important. Economic, we've talked about, so that support, travel support. So that's financial as well, which is really important, but that investment. And then psychological is overall support, that health and well-being that we're talking about, which is really driven by these social, cultural, and economic factors. So what became evident from the findings, that theory of institutional theory and the deeper explanation exploration of institutional work. And that means the practices of that senior managers, and I mentioned it before, their practices can disrupt, they can change, they can align and maintain an organisation. In this case, the managers, we want them to disrupt. We need them to change and align the practices targeted women high-performance coaches. And when they interact with and consider the social, cultural, economic and psychological factors and components of their actions, will start to really drive these attraction, development and retention practices for women high-performance coaches. If we look at an example of that, we consider transparent pathways, which recognises an attraction practice to enable the practices to be effective practices. All four factors were required to be active. So the social factor contained all the three components. We need the senior managers or the leaders, I like to call them. They need to really understand and work on their interaction between people. They need to examine and tap into the beliefs and values of the people and the organisation. Now, the cultural factor contained all three components: the visibility to show that the pathway is there and it's transparent. And that really shifts the power dynamics and establishes status belief for the women that they can apply, and that a transparent pathway is available and they'll be scrutinised as everyone should be and go through a selection criteria. The economic factor highlights the investment, which was evident to provide a transparent pathway for women high-performance coaches. And then finally, that psychological factor, provide the support component for women attracted to become a high-performance coach. So therefore, for any of those 12 practices to be effective, all four factors are really important. They need to be considered first and required to interact with each practice. If we look at what it all means, and from an academic standpoint, I was able to create a new focus and framework for the EIM at the organisational level, which is really important. And I've shown and explained the interaction of the four factors and their components with the 12 practices and activate them to become effective practices to attract, develop and retain women high-performance coaches. But I was able to illustrate that the framework to reveal the intersection of the practices with the four factors and their components, which is really exciting. That apart from being exciting, it's beneficial to share with the leaders and how they can be applied. I've created the model, and I've been through these before, but we can see that interaction is really important to consider. If we want to effectively advocate for another example, women high-performance coaches, which is a really important retention practice. It requires the four factors and their components. The managers need to advocate through the interaction with people in all forms, and this is really important. So our written form, our verbal and face-to-face, but our actions are just as important. The social media marketing is vital to communicate the values and beliefs of the NSO for their women high-performance coaches. The cultural factor, the visibility, and it's not there. The visibility is very poor. Women high-performance coaches, it'll be raised if we do that. And the power dynamics will begin to shift, which is exciting, and increases the status belief of women high-performance in coaches in NSOs, NGOs. All three components at play again. So in doing so, the decision makers send a clear signal to all stakeholders that they're invested. And this is another vital, so you can start to see the pattern. They're invested in their women high-performance coaches, which provides evidence of their support. So the women high-performance coaches see all this evidence and they feel supported. I'm part of a team. I'm not tokenistic. I'm vital. I'm really valued at the organisation. And therefore, when you do consider the four factors first, this practice is then activated to become effective. So what can the leaders do? They can use these as a guide. In essence, the findings have provided a practical guide for them in the form of a checklist for the decision makers. So there's no excuse not to have them. The checklist is there for you with the 12 effective practices and the 31 associated recommendations. And I work a lot with these leaders on these and more, but we really need to be working on their attraction, development and retention strategic practices to follow. And we discuss the institutional work with the senior managers and the role that plays, which is really important. Now, I'll talk about it more, that disrupt, that change, that align and maintenance. But the senior leaders, this is really identified as a risk. It's a high risk for me if they're not prepared to be doing these things. And therefore, to avoid this situation, we've got to have clear and purposeful communication. We've got to have that recognition and validation. And communication is not just how you communicate, how you receive it as well. Become a great listener, not the best talker, even though I'm doing all the talking at the moment. But it's really important that our written, verbal and visual communication and social media starts to showcase and advocate. So a key passion of mine, clearly, as you can see, is leadership and what makes good leaders and leadership. It's a really important topic of high importance for me that I dive into every day. And it's been a research topic for decades, but I'm taking a deep dive from a different perspective. And I really want to understand how practices are formed by a leader. So what's the bedrock of a leader's decision-making to form a practice? And my focus on leadership in particular looks at the beliefs and values of successful leaders. And the leaders that I target, and I'm really privileged and blessed, as I said, to have conducted over 150 interviews so far over the last 12 months. But I interview and work with CEOs, presidents, business owners, board members in corporate, NSOs, governments. I work with high performance coaches in every sport, the highest levels, Olympic, Commonwealth Games, World Championship levels. You know, some fascinating stories that I've worked with Army, Navy, Air Force, Space Force, interview people in the Pentagon, Major Generals, Admirals, SAS commanders. Fabulous stories that I learned from them on their leadership, special forces, emergency services. I've got a lot of big research coming up with federal police. I work with psychologists, academic leaders, and another fascinating study that I'm working hard on is women from cultural minorities and their leadership and what they go through. But where that institutional work theory came from, I'm really digging now and how practices how can they disrupt, how can they change, how can they align and maintain individuals, teams, organisations, groups and communities. And I wanted to know the practice of these senior leaders, how they're formed. And when you look at the beliefs and values, they're formed in our ecosystems. They form early from parents, from siblings, cousins, relations, and then they broaden out to school, universities, sports coaches, local communities, and then we go into the workforce. We experience leaders there. We become a leader. We mirror what we've experienced. But then I look at pivotal moments and how does that leadership change. But really, our beliefs form our behaviour, and they arrive from those different ecosystems, and our values underpin them. And I can break down all that data and I look at I create maps, but I really want to understand what a leader thinks their purpose is. And I look at those pivotal moments and I look at how beliefs change. And they do, they evolve and they change. So we listen to podcasts, we experience different things in our workplaces, we attend sessions like this. The Army, in particular, SAS commanders, people in battle, their beliefs and values are severely challenged and they change often. So I look at all these and how they change, and that allows me to explore the data and how it changes and I map the leadership. But I'm really looking at these pivotal moments and pull them apart. And my vision, as I said at the start, was to explore the concept of leadership excellence. What does it entail? How do we reach the high state of leadership? And I work a lot with leaders in organisations and I help profile them, profile their teams. But I have really deep purpose to help senior leaders across all industries, and in particular, women's leadership is a real passion of mine, because I think we're not tapping into the best leaders that we possibly can. And it's something I want to understand more, understand our purpose, organisational purpose, and I look to align values. And it's a lot of work that I go into that I could dive in deeper in another session. But I'll wrap it up there because I know we have a discussion. So thank you very much for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. I'm really looking forward to sharing some questions, because it's enough of me talking to you. I'd like to talk with you. So I'll hand back to Sarah. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Damien. That was really, really insightful. We do have a question from Eva. From the recommendations and framework you've created, have you seen an impact with the organisations that you work with, and an impact on recruiting, retaining and developing?
Yeah, great question, and thank you. Yes, I have. And what really comes through from it's an education to understand. I did tap into strategic plans at the start, but what tends to happen, without going too deep into strategic plans, are made as a tick the box often that I've looked at, and they go into the drawing, they're not brought out. But going through these practices, this is a blueprint to attract, develop, and retain. And some should state the obvious, but they're not obvious, and they haven't been put in play. And why they haven't been put in play, because they haven't been highlighted. But it's incumbent, as I'll keep going back to, that the senior managers put these practices in place, and they keep going back to them, and they keep challenging the other senior leaders in the organisation to disrupt and to put them in and change. And now that we're seeing the organisations I work with and do workshops with, we get a common set of values around that as well. And it's really, really starting to move the needle. It's just starting, but it is exciting to see some change starting to happen. Yeah. Thank you. Great question.
We've also got another question. If your findings show how and what to do, why aren't there more top female coaches leading men's teams?
It's a great question. My thoughts and discussion with a lot of people is it's back to the leaders, that we need to start making decisions on the best leaders, but having the courage to put those best leaders out there and not try to remain popular with our members, with our supporters within the organisations, that we're putting a woman in place. And the other thing that we're doing is we're putting immediate pressure. If there is a woman high performance coach put in to say, this is the first woman coaching a men's team or coaching this particular sport. So then what happens, it becomes a justification of why a woman is coaching here, rather than we have the best coach available coaching here, which is exciting for our organisation, that's going to bring these skills and these values and this record with them. We're excited to have them. The conversation, and it really disappoints me looking at a lot of media conferences that is introducing this as the first woman too. It looks like it's a celebration. However, it becomes a justification. So to answer your question, we need the courage of the senior leaders to look at who is the best leader. Gender has got nothing to do with leadership. We need to have the best leader. So if that's a woman who's going to be the high performance coach in what has been a traditional male high performance coach role, the introduction of support around that power dynamic shift that we talked about before needs to put in place. And it's got to be strong, because often we put leaders in place, and you'll see male coaches get in the EPO, great example of male coaches now in Australian rules football. A new coach comes in, male coach, they're celebrated, and they have 8 losses in a row, and they're under the pump. But what a lot of the places do is put more support around them. But with women, what happens, the pressure comes on to say, I told you so. You were given an opportunity, I told you so. And they're out because there starts to be noise. So we've got to have really strong leadership around that noise and narrative to say, we believe in this person, they are the best leadership, and we're going to provide that support, because what they're doing, they're disrupting as well. So sometimes we've got to go backwards to go forwards.
Thank you. And in terms of disrupting, I mean, how do we facilitate this change and disruption? What are your thoughts on, do we need more quotas? Would that be helpful?
Quotas was a really interesting topic, and it remains an interesting topic, because in one respect, quotas are good, but what quotas brought up was a fear with women who are in the system, that the role can look like it's tokenistic. So we want to have 3 women as high performance coaches in this sport, in this organisation. So even if they are skilled and meet or exceed the criteria, which most do, if they're put in there, it goes back to that tokenistic. So what we need is the leaders again to start disrupting the conversation and the social media, the conversation internally and externally, that we're going to have key criteria, selection, and we've got transparent pathway of what we're looking for. But the leaders that come in, I'm not interested, we are, as a collective leadership, not interested in gender. We want to get the best available person. And if that best available person is a woman, so be it. But we've got to stop the gender conversation as well and say we're disrupting, we're looking for the best leaders. And the thing with transparent pathways is the criteria then becomes clear, but the amount of people, if more women are attracted, selection gets more difficult, because you get more leaders in the talent pool. So you really, really have to become strong on what you're looking for. So we've got to have that courage to make things transparent. That is going to disrupt, they're going to make harder decisions, and we've got to put that support, but we've got to start putting the advocacy and showcasing that we've got the courage to make these decisions, because we'll always have, there's an acronym called FOPO, which is fear of other people's opinion, and sport is still heavily driven with FOPO. We're scared, we've got a real fear of other people's opinions, that if we make these courageous decisions, not to put a tokenistic person in there, but we've selected what we believe and value as the best leader to come into our organisation, that we support that and put it through. So again, it comes back to the leadership.
Thank you. And we've got a question here from Jessica. What specific leadership attributes would you see that has been common between leaders that you've interviewed?
Leadership dynamics has really shifted. And if we look back, particularly when I was experiencing leadership in sport from the 80s and 90s, perhaps early 2000, we were really looking at quite a lot of autocratic and dictatorial leadership, my way or the highway style, and high performance needs. The expectation is if you don't meet that, you're out. So there's a lot of quite terse faces. You'll probably remember back in those days, hands on hips, hands are folded. But what's really changed, really evident, is emotional intelligence is now number one. And that goes back to recognition and validation of people. So emotional intelligence, I put right up there. If I've got criteria that I'm working with senior leaders on, recognition and validation is so important. Communication is vital, but your communication and your receipt of communication. So being a great listener is vital, and that emotional intelligence, having empathy, having care, having understanding, being able to support, being able to understand, being able to listen, knowing what your purpose is as a leader. Now, I talk a lot and I work a lot with the leaders on what is the purpose of a leader. Are you present? What is your presence is really important as well. And leadership is situational specific. You don't have the blueprint every day. So it's not a plug and play of what used to happen. It's really changed those dynamics, and understanding people is highly important. So this is where we get a lot more great women leaders who are fantastic, often superior at communication, that recognition and validation. And it might sound funny, but noticing little things like hair colors changing, moods are changing for whatever reason, and particularly in women's sports, understanding cycles for monthly cycles for women, but how does that impact mood? But also men's mental health is really important. We're really starting to understand the importance of mental health and the importance that has. So the emotional intelligence has come up to number one in that criteria. Recognition and validation of people, communication you receive of, and how you communicate, really important. I do a lot of work around that, but understanding beliefs and values. So it wasn't great player becomes great coach, and I'll tell you how to play, and it's my way. It's a lot deeper, and there's a lot more context for leadership these days.
Brilliant, thank you. And our final question from Amy. In your research, did you see a particular age demographic for female leaders, or was there any drop-off at all? Is there any correlation between becoming a parent and leaving the coaching world?
Great question. Really good question. Yes, there was. Particularly in the early 30s, there was a drop-off. And why that drop-off happened, it was that decision on you either coach or you have a family. And so make your decision. The support structures weren't there, and they still aren't there most of the time. And I had some really disappointing discussions around family. A very quick story, if you like. I had a discussion with a well-known high-performance coach, with gold medal winning, and said, "Tell me about this women's stuff you're researching." I said, "Oh, sure," with a bit of a smirk, and I went through some of the things that were going, and this person said, "Well, they want everything." And I said, "I'm not sure what does that mean." He said, "Well, they want to be parents and they want to coach, and I need them here and at these times. So it's either do this or do that." And I said, "That's really interesting." And I'm a full-time single father, and I've been in corporate for a long time, and managed projects all over the world, multi-million-dollar projects, and work with leadership. So from what I understand, he was saying is that make my decision. It's either be a parent or be involved, or do I have that support and understanding, care and empathy and flexibility to be a parent, but I'll give you my all and what I'm doing at work and do what I'm doing. So there was a big correlation, to answer your question, on the 30s. And then women, some stayed through their 40s and into their 50s now, despite that. So it became, I'm going to prove. So there was a real anger towards it as well. So it's still vitriolic, but there's a real risk in the late 20s to late 30s, probably 40, of losing a lot of women, because we still have an expectation of, you want to be a parent, off you go. You've got to get better at it.
Thank you so much, Damien. That was so insightful. Thank you for sharing all your research and findings. I've thoroughly enjoyed it and really appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me, Sarah.
Yeah. Oh, no, it's been a pleasure, and we look forward to sort of more in-depth discussions. And thank you. We are running out of time as well. So thank you to Louise for all her behind-the-scenes tech support.
Yeah, thank you, Louise.
And thank you for everybody for joining us today. If you're not already a member of Women in Football, please go to our website and sign up. Tell all of your colleagues to do the same, because guess what? There's strength in numbers. And keep an eye on our social media and our website for future events and leadership courses. But thank you for joining us, and have a great rest of the day. And Damien, we look forward to talking to you again soon.
Anytime, Sarah. Thank you. And thanks to Women in Football.